All right, we are starting section 3.1. Chapter 3, we get into some sampling and how we can actually run an experiment. So 3.1 is on the sampling techniques and bias. What are sampling techniques and when does bias occur? So sampling is the process of selecting a part of something. It's often a smaller group of people to make conclusions about a larger group. A population is the entire group, and the sample is the part of the population that we actually examine in order to gather data on that. So it'd be like if you want to know something about people, like studies on people, they don't actually go out there and get information from every single person in the entire world. There's hundreds of millions of people out there, and it's impossible to go and get questions answered from each person. So what we do is we get a sample of a smaller group of people, and we kind of use that to predict on the entire population. So in example 1, it says the NRA, which is the National Rifle Association, put a question in the newspaper asking the public to respond in favor or against to the allowing for the passing of a bill that would allow people to carry firearms in public. They reported that 86% of all people who responded said they were in favor of allowing the bill to pass. Based on these results, do you think the Wisconsin government leaders should pass the bill due to the strong public support? Okay. And what we have here is no. This is already in your notes, I believe. It says no. Most people who respond to such an article are going to have strong feelings toward it. Usually people respond when they are upset about something or when they are strongly involved in supporting something. So in this example, they don't go around and just ask a random person. What they're doing is they're putting in the newspaper, and their people have to actually call in. So in order for someone to actually read the newspaper and then decide they feel strong enough to actually call in, generally those people feel strongly in favor or strongly against. So the people that are just, whatever, they're not going to actually call in. So this is not a good reason that government leaders should pass this bill. This is called voluntary response sample. It consists of people who choose themselves by responding to a general appeal. They generally overrepresent a strong opinion, and this sampling design is often not very reliable. Okay, example 2. In a college stats class, the professor asked the students to break into groups and develop a survey to ask the people of La Crosse to find out the general feelings and how good a job they thought the mayor was doing at the time. So they want these students to break into groups, find out, do people think the mayor is doing a good job? They were given no instructions on how to collect the data. The students went out into the mall on a Saturday and stopped people to answer the survey. What was wrong with this question? Or what was wrong with this sample when they go to the mall and then they ask people how they thought the mayor was doing? What was wrong is that they were not getting a representation of all of the La Crosse population. They were focusing on an elderly or young people. Those are the people that generally are found at the mall. People that have money to spend, and they stayed away from people that did not look like they were in the mood. So, like when you go to the mall and someone looks like they won't be bothered, you're not going to run up and ask that person a question. People at the mall may not even be from La Crosse. They may be from Toma or somewhere else. So it's not a good way to go and get that data when you go to the mall, because you're not actually getting a good representation of all the people in La Crosse. This is called convenience sampling. It's a sampling technique that chooses the individuals who are easiest to reach. It's fast and inexpensive. This sampling design is often not very reliable. Okay, because when you do an experiment, if you want to know what people truly think, you can't just ask your friends. You can't just ask the people you see in your math class or just the people you see at the mall. You have to ask a random group of people. So convenience sampling is not very reliable because you're usually just getting the people who you're around. what is bias? So we just talked about convenience sampling. We talked about volunteer response. Now we're going to talk about what is bias. When a sample design is almost guaranteed not to give a true representation of the population. So when the sampling design contains systemic error. This is when you design your sample and your questioning, and beforehand you probably could say like this is not going to be very accurate because it's going to be misleading. The answer to be misleading, and we can do a couple examples of that. So many surveys nowadays are done via the phone to collect a sample. Let's say we are going to do a survey of lacrosse adults on whether they would support a new referendum for the school district. Are there any concerns you might have doing the survey this way? So you're going to call people on the phone, and you do a survey of lacrosse adults and see if they're in favor of a new referendum for the school. What would your concerns be? And you can see below there, if we are collecting data about the entire population of lacrosse, all people who don't have a phone or don't have a listed number would automatically be excluded. So if people don't have a phone at home and you're trying to call home, they're never going to have a chance to answer your question. So it says this is often very biased against poor people who don't have a phone. There are also many people that I know at least that won't answer the phone if it's a random number calling. So they won't even pick up their phone. Like I know I don't answer my phone when it's not someone I know. So how can bias occur? There's 3 ways. Under coverage. A sample design that leaves out a portion of the population. So like the one we just talked about, when you're calling home, that will be under coverage because people who don't have a phone aren't going to answer. So you're not covering all the people. You're only covering the people with a phone. The second one is non-response bias. That is when an individual is randomly chosen and cannot be contacted or refuses to complete the survey. So it'll be if you pick somebody and they choose that they do not want to complete that survey, that would be non-response or they don't respond. And then there's response bias. This occurs when the question of a survey are written or presented in a certain way that might cause a person to answer in a way that might not necessarily be true. It would kind of be like if you and your friends were out doing something you know you shouldn't be doing, and you came home and your parents, mom or dad or guardian said, hey, what were you and your friends doing? You most likely are not going to tell them the truth. You're not going to say, hey, we were doing this, even though we know we shouldn't have been. So that would be response bias. So non-response, they don't answer. Response bias, they answer, but they don't answer truthfully. And then under coverage is where you're not asking all the people that should be included. So asking questions that are personal, illegal, unpopular, confusing can contribute to this. This is kind of what we just talked about. If you're doing something illegal, you're not going to go and tell your parents or tell a cop. The sex or race of a person asking the questions can influence a person's response. Like a woman asking a man about women's rights might not get his true feelings. Right? So like if a girl asks a guy, what do you think about women's rights? The guy may not tell him truthfully. Like if they don't care about it, they might not tell that girl that because they don't want to maybe hurt the girl's feelings. So that would be response bias. So depending on who's asking the question can make their answer different. And then a person's relationship to the population. So if your boss wants to do a random sample of his employees to find out about employee satisfaction in the workplace, right? So picture that. Your boss comes to you, how do you like working for me? How are you going to answer that question? You're not going to say, I hate it, you're terrible. You're going to probably lie a little bit if you feel that way. So that would be response bias. Telescoping. This is a big one that you probably see on television or the news. It's asking people to remember things from the past. So when is the last time you ate dinner at the Freight House on the Cross? That may not always be a truthful answer because trying to think way back to when the last time you did something, you might forget. And then wording effect. This is the one I was actually talking about. Wording effect is when a question is worded in such a way that sways the person's answer. So this is one you might see on the news when they do polls and things like that. You might see wording effect that is trying to convince a person to answer in a certain way. So for example, would you be willing to have slightly higher property taxes about what you would pay to go to the movies for one night to provide the needed improvements to the school district of La Crosse? Okay. That is wording effect. Notice how the question says, would you be willing to have slightly higher property taxes? It's about the amount you'd pay to go to the movies, so not that much, to provide the needed improvements to the school district of La Crosse. So that's trying to convince them, obviously, that it's a very, very little tax increase. They're trying to make them say yes. Okay, so that wording might make someone answer different than they normally would. So wording effect is one way of bias. Adding to that, if someone was not in favor of this and they're asking a question, they might say, do you want your taxes to go up? You're going to pay a lot more money in taxes just to have improvements to the school when they already have what they need. So that would be a wording effect to make someone say, well, no, I don't want my taxes to go up. So how you word it can change someone's response. So checkpoints. The following questions were asked to a group of people. Identify whether the question would result in undercoverage, non-response, or response bias, and explain your reasoning. So how would you rate the mayor's job performance? Would you say he's doing a good job, outstanding job, or terrific job? So if you were asked that question, what is wrong with how it's asked? This would be a form of response bias because the way it's worded is going to change your response. It is worded such that all answers are positive. Notice they don't say in here, do you think he's doing a terrible job? It's, do you think he's doing a good job, outstanding job, or terrific job? They don't give you a chance to say, well, I don't think he's doing well. So that is response bias. They're trying to get you to say he's doing a good job or a terrific job. Number 2, a company sends out a survey via U.S. Postal Service. 200 of the 450 mailings were returned. So you send out 450 things in the mail to get returned, to return the survey, and only 200 of them are returned. So is this undercoverage, non-response bias, or response bias? This would be non-response bias. And the reason why is only 200 of 450 were replied. We'll say not returned. Replied. That's less than half. Right, so the major issue here is not that they didn't get all 450 back, because odds are you're not going to get every single one back, but less than half of them came back. So this would be non-response bias. Because less than half of the surveys were returned. And then number 3, a local Best Buy gave a handout for people to complete a survey online. The question was, what is your preferred search engine? A local Best Buy gave a handout for people to complete a survey online. The question was, what is your preferred search engine? So is this response bias, undercoverage, or non-response? This would be undercoverage. And the reason why is who's going to get this survey and who's going to be able to reply to this survey. So those without access to internet can't respond. So right there, someone does not have internet or they don't have a smartphone, don't have a computer, they can't respond to this. Okay, also, if you don't go to Best Buy, you're not going to get the survey. Okay, so that will be under coverage because if you don't have internet, you can't respond. If you don't go into Best Buy, you're never going to get that survey. So under coverage, because they're only giving it to a certain people who go to Best Buy, and then those who have internet are the only ones that can respond. So under coverage, non-response, and response bias are the three main ones we talked about. And we also talked about convenient sampling and voluntary response sampling.